cars, more roads, and people got more and more money, and they thought, oh, this man, his name was Hitler, he is good. But you know, Hitler, even though he was doing some good things, he was a really bad person. He did not like certain people. And among those people were Jewish people. And so I'm going to be telling you what was happening in Holland during that time. So in Holland, there's Jewish people and Dutch, but they were all Dutch people, and the Jewish people looked just like the Dutch people. They all looked the same. And the kids would all go to school, and nobody knew that anybody was any different from anybody else. Well, then Hitler decided he needed more countries. He needed more power. So he took his soldiers and they went into the smaller countries like Holland. And at first they were pretty nice to them, because when you listen to the German language and we call it the Dutch language. In Holland they speak the Dutch language. And it's very similar to the German language. So the people in Holland weren't that afraid yet. But then gradually they started hearing about Hitler did not like the Jewish people. And then after a while, Hitler said, the Jewish people have to wear stars. They have to put the yellow star on their clothes so that everybody would know that those are the Jewish people. And then he started telling all the people that the Jewish people were bad people and that they should not be allowed to live. So first the Jewish people could not go to the parks anymore. They could not go to the theaters anymore. They could not go see a movie anymore. They could not go swimming anymore in the swimming pools. So the kids that were in the schools with the other kids, there's the Jewish kids and the other kids, and the other kids started thinking, well, those kids are different. I'm not going to be their friend anymore. Some kids did. Some kids always stayed friends, but others said, no, because maybe I'll get in trouble if I have a friend that's Jewish. So I'm not going to be their friend anymore. And that made the Jewish kids really, really sad. And then they even took the Jewish children out of the schools and put them in special schools. So they couldn't be with their other kids, their friends anymore. They had to be in the special schools. And you know what happened after that? Some of those kids disappeared. So maybe there were 30, 40 kids in the classroom. And two of those kids, their names were Ellie and Henry. Henry was a little bit older than Ellie, so they were in two different classes, but they all had to go to the special school for Jewish kids. And they were, all the kids that they were playing with before, they couldn't play with them anymore. So they just had their own Jewish kids to play with. But they couldn't go to the parks. They could not go to the movies. It was pretty scary for them, because some of those kids, maybe the child that was sitting next to them in the classroom, the next day the child wasn't there anymore. Where did the child go to? What happened? And then out in the streets, they could see there were soldiers. Hitler had sent soldiers to Holland, and they said, you make sure you take those Jewish people, you take them, put them on the train, and we're going to send them to special camps. So they could see what was happening, and some of those people were very scared. And those soldiers were pretty mean. And they would tell them, okay, go get in the tram, go, move faster, And some of them were old people, some of them were young people, and some were people with babies and kids your age, and they would have to go on the trams, and then on the train, and then they would be sent to a camp far away. They didn't know what camps were like, but they were not good camps. They were bad camps. So what was Ellie and Henry and the parents, what were they going to do? They needed to find a place where they could hide. And that's what a lot of Jewish people did at that time. But there were not that many hiding places. Well, my parents had a big house, and they had a drugstore in the house. And upstairs there was a lot of space. And there was my mother, my father, and my mother worked in the drugstore, but she was a pharmacist. And my father helped her, and he would go and buy the things for the drugstore. And then one time, a lady, which was a friend of my mother's, she called my mother and said, you know, we are in trouble because we're Jewish. And we have to go, they told us to go on the tram, in the train, to the camps. And my mother said, oh, you come over here. You can hide in our house. So they went and hid in the house. And then Ellie and Henry's parents had the same problem. And they said, oh, where do we go? Where can we go? And my mother and father said, you can come to our house. You can come. We'll keep you as safe as we can keep you. So they came to our house. But there was a drugstore, and all kinds of people would come to the drugstore, and that was down here. And then the people, my parents and other people, and the Jewish people that came, were right above the drugstore. So what do you think? Could they make all kinds of noise? No, because what if the customers that came to the store, they could hear a lot of noise up there? Would that be good? No. Then they would think, why are there so many people up there? There's only supposed to be the father and mother and maybe one child, but no, not that many people, no noise. So Henry and Ellie, could they just jump around and make a lot of noise? No, they had to be very quiet. Could they go by the windows and look out the windows? What do you think? No. Why?
People would see them.
People on the street would see them. Yeah, so they couldn't do that. And then above the living room, there was an attic. So my father built a special hiding place because maybe the German people, the soldiers would come inside and search the place, and they couldn't just be out in the living room. They could not be out in the attic. They had to be hiding behind a wall in a special place that they made. So it was pretty dangerous for everybody. And then there was a young lady who was working helping my parents in the drugstore, and she also lived there. And you know what happened? This young lady, she had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend was in the German army. My parents didn't know that. And so one time, the young lady asked my parents, she said, can I go home? And her home was way over on the other side of Holland, close to Germany. Can I go home for 2 weeks and be with my parents? I haven't seen them in a long time, and I would like to go home. And so my parents said, okay, you can go home, but you know, you come back after 2 weeks because we need you to help us. So she packed up her suitcase and a box, and she had all these different things, and then one of the guests in our house walked her to the train. And then she came home, he came home, and he said to my mother, you know, that gal, and her name is Yopi, she has a lot of things that she took home. A suitcase, and then she asked me to send this box. And I don't trust it. And my mother said, no, I don't trust it either, because what would she need for 2 weeks? A big suitcase. She didn't even have a big suitcase when she came. She didn't have that much. And a big box. Why would she have to take all that home for 2 weeks? So they decided to open that box. And in the box, there were all kinds of things that she had stolen out of the drugstore. There was toothpaste. There were toothbrushes. There was soap. And it was very, very difficult to have soap, because there were not many things. It was wartime. The Germans were telling the Dutch people, the people in Holland, what they could have and what they could not have. And there were not that many things they could have. And she had stolen them. She was going to take them to her parents in that box. But you know what else was in the box? There was something else in the box. There was a letter in the box.
I know it.
Yeah, and they looked at the letter, and you know what? That letter was from her boyfriend. And in the letter it said, Yopi, you make sure you leave that house for 2 weeks from that day to this day. Don't be there, because I'm going to make sure that all those Jewish people will be picked up and sent to a camp. Because for every Jewish person that gets picked up and sent to a camp, you, Yopi, and I will get money. Yeah, they could earn money that way. Whoa, now what? So my mother and my father, and they looked at that letter. What are we going to do? What do you think they have to do? Could they just stay there and wait for the Germans to come and take all the people out?
No.
And Ellie and Henry, just take them and send them to a camp? No. No. So they had to find different places for them to go and hide. And they looked and looked, and sure enough, they found some places for them to hide. And Ellie and Henry went to 2 different homes where they could hide, and their parents went to another home yet. Well, when the parents were in this other home, something happened. Something bad happened there. What do you think happened? They got caught. The parents got caught. There was the bad people that came, the soldiers that Hitler sent over there, they were Nazis. And some of the people in Holland, even though they weren't German, they were Dutch people, but they were Nazis. And they were helping Hitler because they could earn some money. And that's what they did. So there was a Dutch Nazi who saw the parents. That was Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez. There's Henry Rodriguez, Ellie Rodriguez, and the parents. Now, Ellie and Henry were in 2 different places. But Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez got caught. And they were sent away to a camp. And do you know what happened to them? What do you think happened in the camp?
They died. Worked to death.
They died.
It was a concentration camp.
It was a concentration camp. Very good. Yeah, there were different concentration camps, and they were sent to the concentration camp. They weren't given hardly any food. They had to work very hard, and they were beaten, and they died. So Henry and Ellie, they did survive, thankfully. And all the other people in the house. There were many, many people that came. Some of them stayed just for a few days till there was another hiding place that my parents could find for them. Some of them have stayed for several years living there. And for my mother and my father, that was very, very difficult. And my mother got sick because there was so much stress. And one of the Jewish people that came had a disease, and it's called tuberculosis. And tuberculosis back then, there was no medication for that. Now, there's lots and lots of medication, but not back then. So, my mother got sick. She was very sick. And the doctor said, you know, you cannot stay, you cannot have this in your house anymore. It's too difficult, it's too much for you. And my father and my mother said, what can we do? Where do we send all these people? We have to stay here. They have to stay here. And we will take care of them. So they did. And then the war ended. So the war was for 5 years. The Germans had come into the country, and for 5 years they told the Dutch people what they could do and what they could not do. And for 5 years, especially the last 3 years, they would take the Jewish people and send them to the camps, just like Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez. And many, many people died. It was a very, very difficult, bad time. So for my parents, it was a very, very difficult time. But thankfully, the war did end. And my mother was very sick, and she had to go to the hospital, and I was born, and she died. So here's the war, horrible war, and I have a brother who was born during that time, during the war, and I didn't have a mother because she died. And her name, my mother's name, who was really a hero, her name was Johanna. And now we have a granddaughter right here, and guess what her name is? Johanna. Yeah. So we were very fortunate. My parents could have died because it was very dangerous for them to hide the Jewish people. But they didn't die. My mother died, but I was still born, and my brother was born, and now we have Johanna too. So there's good side and bad side. Yeah. So what do you think, Hitler? Who is Hitler? German. And what did he do? He killed people, especially the Jewish people. Now, if something like that happens here, what if you have friends and somebody comes over and says, hey, those friends are bad. You shouldn't play with them because they're Jewish or they're something not like you, even though they look like you. And somebody says, don't play with them. What would you
guys
do?
know that Manny's Jewish? Yeah.
Yeah. We saw a picture of him.
So, any questions?